Totally. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You have a really fascinating business. So I want to start off talking just about HIA analytics and what you do.
Sure. Um, we are a full service higher education consulting company. What we do the most of is building predictive models, so statistical models that predict student behavior from, inquiry to applicant conversion, admit to enroll yield, and then retention. We sort of build predictive models all along that student life cycle. And we help colleges and universities spend their financial aid dollars efficiently to meet their goals. So, whatever, if they have certain programs that they have to fill or certain areas where they're challenged, we kind of take a look at all the factors that influence yield and come up with financial aid strategies based on that. So that's the bulk of what we do.
Great. Now, to take a step backwards for those people who are like really new to this, what exactly is a predictive model?
So a predictive model is basically just a mathematical equation. So we use, there are different statistical tests that you can run. Now everyone's sort of heard of AI and machine learning models. Those are the newest versions. There's older versions that are still quite reliable. So we're building a regression model and we're looking at all of the factors basically that we can include. So for a yield model, we're looking at everything that comes in on the application, demographics and GPAs and interests, and then also everything that comes in on the financial aid application. So we're looking at whether the family has demonstrated need, did they apply for financial aid, and what offer did they get?
Yeah. So for your predictive modeling, what are you looking at? Whether or not a student will be successful, whether or not they'll continue? What are some of those points that you're examining?
Yeah, we're looking at all of that. So when we build a yield model, an admit to enroll yield model, we're looking at kind of shaping the class, what types of students will enroll, but then we're also looking at who will be successful, who will be able to continue and graduate from the university. Of course, that's the end goal. So we sort of see retention as an enrollment goal. We want to know students' likelihood. And really, we can build models that predict retention from only information we have before the student arrives on campus. So just using kind of the application and the financial aid information, we can identify students who might be more at risk of dropping out, who might need some extra support. And we can sort of assign likelihood scores based on, your likelihood to retain, your likelihood to enroll. So schools can really use that to build support services around students that are helpful to everybody.
Well, I love this for community colleges because there's not, there's not unlimited resources. So
Mhm.
having some data to show students who might need extra support from the beginning, particularly communication support, would be invaluable. So you're not
Mhm.
wasting time talking to 18,000 students. Perhaps now you've identified 1,800 and can really reach out and start
Yeah.
supporting them.
Yeah, and that's exactly what kind of the inquiry to applicant models that we build. We're dealing with, some schools have inquiry pools of 200,000 students. And we can, as you said, narrow it down to like 20,000 have some chance of applying. The rest of these are not going to apply and they're definitely not going to enroll. So that they can direct, expensive publications or outreach to those students who have a higher likelihood, and it's just a more efficient process.
Wow, that's interesting. So we don't do a lot of work with four-year universities. So I was just thinking, like, wow, not everybody gets one of those fancy, like,
Yeah,
V-Books in the mail. Not all 200,000 people interested in UC Santa Barbara get one of those.
right, right. Yes, definitely
Yeah,
not.
yeah, fascinating. One of the things that we see with our clients is that their systems just don't talk to each other. So here in California, for example, all 115 community colleges share a common application. That
Mhm.
application is run by the state chancellor's office. but then they may have a homegrown enrollment system. So the
Mm.
application, you can't track the student through. Is that something that your company can assist with? And how do you do that when you have all these different systems that don't talk to each other?
Yeah, so we use a software product called Alteryx Designer, and it allows for disparate data sets to be kind of merged together. It has a lot of, tools that if you don't, sometimes we find that schools can't even exactly match the data sets, so they may have one type of ID in one system and another type of ID in another. So we can do things like fuzzy matching, which sort of pulls all of the things that are, the same and matches students that way. And we can put that together into a workflow that a college or a school can use to, run it to get a data set that includes everything from every system, and then use that, of course, to make strategic decisions. Because as you said, if the systems don't talk to each other, it's very difficult to do that. So yeah, we have worked with a lot of schools where that's the issue, and we can kind of help them with the merging of those files.
Great. And what type of things are you looking for? I mean, is this all AI generated, or is there a human component to it as well? What are the data points that you're searching for?
So we're looking for likelihood of a student engaging in a certain behavior. And so with statistical models, they will predict kind of, or they'll create a predicted outcome score for each student. So that's kind of the AI side. And, there's a lot of companies now talking about we use AI models to predict your students' behavior and they're highly accurate. And that's true. But the human component is very important as well. So HAI stands for Human and Artificial Intelligence. And what my business partner and I saw in our, previous roles is that students come out of undergrad with incredible experience building statistical models. They can build very complicated AI models. But they haven't actually implemented them in a real world setting. No model is perfect because outside factors can change that the model can't take into account. So a big part of what we do is, interpreting the models and sometimes adjusting them. If we have a school where, we know the models always under predict enrollment, then we can adjust that. We can account for that. Um, so the human component is very important, and I would say that machine learning and AI, they're buzzwords now, but they definitely need someone with experience, in our case, in enrollment management, to know, which parts of this do I trust, which parts do I question, and kind of interpret it in that way.
Right. Um, we were talking about human and artificial intelligence, which I didn't know that's what your company name stood for, which is
Yep.
brilliant. And I wanted to see how you've actually applied this. So share with us an example, and you don't have to say names because I know some of your clients are probably protected with and are confidential. But just how has a college, a community college, or a university used your services to make improvements?
Mhm. So a lot of our, all of our clients have specific enrollment goals. They have headcount goals, of course, they have revenue goals, and the models help develop a strategy that, in unison with their expertise and the work that they're doing on the ground, gets them to those goals that they're trying to achieve. But I think one of the most impactful things that we do is looking at first to second year retention before the student arrives on campus. So looking at when we develop a financial aid strategy that maybe in the first year it meets all, checks all the boxes. It's the revenue, it's the head count, discount rate. But in year two, that may, something that's producing more revenue in year one means students are getting less aid. They may be less likely to retain. So if we look at the revenue over 2 years using this retention model, sometimes we find that a strategy that's more generous in year one will net more over 2 years than a strategy that's less generous. So I think that's something that it affects the institution. It helps them to, operate effectively, and also it's good for the student that they're sort of looking out for that, and they're not just trying to get you in the door. They really want you to be successful and be happy alums someday.
Yeah, that's great. And I love the idea of using this for retention because one of the problems we see and that we help a lot of our clients with marketing wise is summer melt, where we've got students who've completed a year and then all of a sudden they disappear.
Hmm.
And knowing if there is a certain type of student that's more at risk for not returning would really help. It would
Yeah.
help marketing tremendously because right now we're just doing like broadcast campaigns, like don't
Hmm.
forget to come back. Like we want you to come back, but nothing like supportive or
Yeah.
personalized. So
Yeah.
I could really see a big use for that.
Yeah, yeah. And you can even look, I mean, once you have kind of a model that's, say, predicting retention, and you know what factors are, statistically significant predictors at that institution, you can not only identify who's at risk, but you can sort of identify why they're at risk. So, is this person at risk because they're from a faraway state and they traveled far to get here? Are they at risk because they don't have enough financial aid? What is it about them that is making the model tag them as at risk? So then the school knows, not just to respond to them, but how they should do it.
Yeah, I see like a lot of applicability too for our applied non-enrolled students. So our students who applied and completed orientation maybe are
Mhm.
more likely to actually register for a class. So now we know we got to get them through the orientation. Like that should be our first communication touch point is
Mhm.
get orientation completed because we know they're more likely to register.
Yeah.
I think that's data that most of our colleges that we work with just don't look at or consider.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the community college system, there are so many, things that they're worrying about, and they can tend to be very big. And as you said, kind of large systems that have, people at different institutions behaving differently. Um, so it can be more complicated, but certainly if the data are there, even if they're not in perfect shape or they're not kind of married together, then we can definitely build some data-driven strategies.
And even here in California, I've got my head is spinning now with ideas. Like you get a greater apportionment, for example, for first generation students. So if
Hmm.
you have more first generation students, you're going to get a higher dollar amount from the state than you would for a student whose parent had gone to college. So most community college students are first generation students. So, I mean,
Hmm.
now you can even look at that cohort and say, like, historically, how have our first generation students, like, what do they have in common, those that succeed?
Yeah.
Have they gotten scholarships? Have they gotten more financial aid? Do they go part time? Do they go full time? So, it would be so fascinating to look at your own institutional data and do some predictions around students that will enroll and ultimately succeed.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, really interesting. One of the things that our colleges are struggling with too is just enrollment in general. And are you able to use your modeling to predict enrollment increases or decreases? Is that something you could help with?
Yes, we can. So one of the things that we do when we're predicting enrollment is we start at the top of the funnel, sort of at the prospect stage. Um, and we feel that that's necessary because sometimes there are things that change in terms of the inquiry pool that aren't evident when you look at the admit pool, but will affect, a student's likelihood to enroll. So we kind of start with that, and we can create a likelihood score, likelihood that they'll apply, and we can also look at the likelihood that they'll actually enroll if they're admitted. Um, and that way, you know, we can, oh my gosh, I just totally lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
And it keeps happening to me lately, and it's driving me crazy.
Well, it might be your cold, like
Oh my gosh, I hope so. where I had a mild stroke. Okay, so the thing that I do is I start talking and I forget the question that I'm answering. So what question am I answering that you asked?
Enrollment increases and
Yes,
decreases.
yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay, yes. So you want me to just like start
Yep.
talking
Just
again?
start over. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the models are really highly accurate at predicting what the yield of a pool will be, how many enrolling students there will be, and whether a school can anticipate increases or decreases based on even sort of the very top of their funnel, like the number of inquiries they have or where they're from. We can kind of follow all the way through to be able to predict changes. And typically what we're doing is we're creating strategies to, in spite of those changes, to hit the goals. So if we expect this pool has a lower likelihood of enrolling based on, a whole collection of factors, they may need more financial aid or more assistance to enroll. So we're kind of looking at it and coming up with a strategy that will help deal with that situation once it does come.
Yeah, I just love this data-driven approach because what we see with our clients is there hasn't been any predictions, there hasn't been any data look or historical analysis, and now it's June and enrollment's down and marketing, who's like a one-person shop,
Yeah.
all of a sudden everybody's freaked out and they give them a bunch of money and they expect
Uh-huh.
them to go find
Yeah.
students to replace what they've lost in the next 2 months. And
Hmm.
our company comes in and tries to help them do that to the best of our knowledge, but getting a bunch of new students is a way harder than knowing why you lost all these students to begin
Yeah.
with and trying to fix that problem.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, that's, my favorite kind of client, schools that have never done this before, because you can see such big differences when you start to implement these tools. And so it's really kind of fun to see those impacts when they're kind of that big.
Yeah, and also just to see like, hey, we don't have a marketing problem. Like
Mhm.
maybe we
Right.
have an X, Y, and Z problem, or maybe this type of student needs more of this type of support.
Hmm.
So I think that type of intelligent data is going to help colleges use their resources better,
Yep. Yep. And that's what it's all about.
for sure. Um, Anything else we haven't talked about that your models can be useful for?
Um, they can be useful. We have done models, like with law schools, we've built models to predict bar passage.
Oh, wow.
Um, and we've been able to kind of tag the students who are most at risk of not passing the bar. And we've had law schools use our findings to sort of shape the curriculum and shape support services. So, the findings really are applicable in lots of different settings. We've worked with medical schools, we've worked with kind of all kinds of schools and colleges. And so being able to predict that student behavior is, something that everybody needs to do, and it's applicable to every type of institution. So that's what we do.
Yeah, and what do you have some challenges? Like if you start working with a college or university, what are some things that are roadblocks for you to do your work?
So, one big roadblock, although this isn't as true anymore, is schools purging their financial aid offers to students who don't enroll. So, if we want to study the effect of financial aid dollars on enrollment, we have to have those offers for both enrolling and non-enrolling. And particularly, I would say, like 10 years ago, it was very common to see that schools have purged those data, and that is a huge setback if you're trying to do yield modeling. So that's one of the big ones that we face. I think another pretty common one is that an institution is kind of siloed. And so, we're hired by the admissions folks, but the admissions folks and the financial aid folks don't really talk to each other. And that is, again, something that I feel like has gotten better over the past, a few years. But that is something that can pose a challenge for sure.
Oh my gosh, silos is the name of the game
Yeah.
when it comes to community colleges.
Yeah, yeah. Well, higher ed in general, they love their silos.
Yes, well, and everybody is so busy too. I mean, they're just trying to keep from drowning and they
Yeah,
don't have time to go and work with other departments.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
that creates this like perpetuating cycle of just, not working with each other.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. I just, for those listening, referred Emily to a college whose president wants to see where students are dropping off in between application and enrollment. And she actually came, this president came to me and said, "Can't you just build a spreadsheet?" And I was like, "You have literally like 10 different systems going. Like, I don't even know where to start." And I was like, "Oh, I just met somebody who might be able to help with this." So I'm really hoping that they'll connect and we can get a really good use case scenario for one of our California community colleges. So
Yeah, yeah, that would be great.
fingers crossed. But yeah, when I started digging, I'm like, so you've got an application system, an enrollment system, an orientation system. Counselors are entering things into different systems. There's
Yeah,
this inquiry form that nobody even knows where it goes to. It's not being entered anywhere. So it's
yeah,
like so many
yeah,
different things,
yeah,
bringing it all together.
yeah.
Well, as we wrap up our conversation, do you have any advice maybe for colleges who aren't ready to hire somebody like you to come in, but might want to just start thinking about how they can better use their data? Is there any advice you can give them?
I think, one big piece of advice, which I sort of just alluded to, is do not purge any of your data. Schools kind of, it's not expensive to keep data now. And oftentimes the financial aid data are being purged because they don't want to accidentally send an award to someone who didn't enroll. But if you want to do anything, any data driven strategy, you've got to have as much data as possible. So don't get rid of any of it. And then, they can, I mean, we'll go into an institution and sort of do that data audit before we sign a contract with a school, just to say, here are some areas where you really need to change your process or you need to start recording the data. And then once you have a cycle or two like that, then we can come back and build the predictive models. But it is important to start thinking about how do we get to that point where we could build predictive models. And I think a lot of schools kind of, or just people kind of get, they freeze when they realize like we have so far to go to be able to predict those models. We're not recording the data in the right way. We're not keeping the data. And it's hard to think about like moving to the next level because, as you said, everybody's busy. But it definitely can be done, and we can help. And I think after sort of the initial pain period, everything gets easier because it's easier to make decisions.
Well, and I was going to ask you how people get started, and it sounds like that's a great way to get started is just to have an audit.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
great. And once this model is built, is this something that you see colleges are able to maintain on their own? Or do they continue to use someone like you to come in annually and help them?
Most of them continue to use us. One of the services that we provide is that if they want to bring it in-house, we'll help them get there. So, if they have someone who can build statistical models but has never done it in this kind of area, we can work with them to show them this is what you need to look for. We've done some of these where it's been a 3-year agreement where the first year we do all the model building, but that their person kind of shadows us and we explain, what we're doing and why we're doing it. In the second year, we sort of run parallel processes and we're, evaluating the way that they're doing things and they're looking at the way we're doing it. And then in the third year, it's kind of the least involvement on our part where they've taken over the modeling and we're just kind of looking everything over to see if, we see any red flags or any issues. And then they can continue and kind of do it on their own. And a lot of people said to us, that's a terrible business model. You're like teaching your clients not to need you. But there are a lot of institutions in the world. So, we feel like just helping schools become more efficient in whatever way is something that we really take joy in.
Yeah, and we're the same in our company. I always tell our clients, if you get to the point where you can do this on your own, I think it's great.
Yeah.
And we'll
Yeah.
help you get there. Well, Gray, I think this is so exciting. I just see for their marketing perspective, how having information to this, how having access to this information and this data can just make your marketing so much more targeted and more
Hmm.
effective, more cost effective, and better in so many ways. So I'm really excited. I'm excited to see if we can get some community colleges to start
Yeah,
using you.
that would be great.
I want to thank you, Emily, so much for being on the podcast. And if people do want to get in touch with you or connect, how can they do that?
They can go to our website, haianalytics.com, and there are forms on there that they can submit with their contact info and we can get back to them. They can also find me on LinkedIn and reach out to me that way. Yeah, so happy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I've
Thank,
learned a lot. Really appreciate it.
thanks for having me.